Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Ananda here with me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more, share with us about who you are, share about your work, and share about what womb-centered healing means to you, both personally and professionally. Uh-oh.
Yeah, so I am an Ayurvedic wellness women's health counselor. So I counsel women mostly in the areas of life and style management.
Mm.
So that includes like nutrition and self-care. And I also facilitate yoni steaming or pelvic spa.
Right.
So um, really through that work, I think actually I identify with the term womb-centered healing. I think it's you are connecting to your womb space, your vital essence. And so for me, being a counselor, it's really just to ignite the feeling that you are your own healer and awakening women to their own intuition and path in life. So um, yeah, I think personally, I've had certain traumas come up in my life, and I was adopted. So I think connecting to the womb is a really important aspect of my life. I recognize that my courage, my inspiration, my creativity, everything that kind of makes me tick and feel like a full human being on the day to day comes from my root chakra. So for me, it's really important. I have a lot of Vata energy, Ayurvedically speaking. So I'm up here all the time, and for me, my kind of overall motto is rooted and connected. To stay rooted and connected, and a lot of times, especially in the area of intuition and guidance or messages, you really can't facilitate those or get the proper reading unless you are connected and really rooted in your root.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, that's what it means for me. And then through my own personal journey of steaming and coming home to this space, I realized that not a lot of women around me have experienced steaming and actually are quite disconnected from this region of our body. So I'm still studying. I'm studying to be a full hydrotherapist for para-steaming. And so right now I'm studying postpartum, and I hope to help support women in that path and during that time. Um, but right now I think my message to the world is menstrual attunement and connecting with this source. So coming home to yourself of sorts, you know. Um, and yeah, what my findings is that women aren't tracking their periods. They don't know why they're getting cramps. They don't know what the uncomfortability is. There's just seems to be lots of questions, and so I offer my support to women to be a guidance and a counselor along the way to help them awaken to their womb healing.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And so, boy, so many questions come up for me around that, but particularly what's coming up is to sort of share about how inner guidance, right, guidance that we receive, and even my hand gestures, right, imply that the guidance, the inner guidance is coming from some outer upward source, down and in, which sometimes it can feel like that. But that the more I've become connected with the womb and the more of my own inner guidance and intuition I've connected with, the more rooted that's become, the more aware I am that our wombs are biologically and spiritually this portal for new beings, for a spirit to take physical form, right? Well, whether that's a baby or whether that's an inspiration of something to create in the world and something to make material in the world. So our wombs are a direct connection to spirit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when we learn to listen and connect with the guidance of the womb, it feels like the most direct and ethical and compassionate and nurturing of ourselves and others guidance that I've received. And I've explored inner guidance and spiritual guidance, but a lot of times, you know, if it's not rooted and connected in our womb space and with Mother Earth, right, that's what results in a lot of the sort of spiritual abuse that you see, where people's unconscious shadow is coming up and influencing the guidance that they're receiving, or even the guidance that they're sharing with others who are disconnected to their own womb space. So they go and seek guidance from someone else, and that someone else claims to have this connectedness, but it's up here. You know, there's this idealization of insights that we get either from the mind or the heart, with this forbidden realm of receiving any guidance from any lower than that. And so, whereas for me, that, you know, because there's this taboo that guidance is somehow going to be sinful or wrong, or you know, um, dark in some way, and it's not valued or trusted by a lot of lineage, you know, spiritual lineage teachings. And it's kind of understandable, because there has been so much suppression, abuse, and trauma in those areas, that if we don't heal that, if we don't attend to that, then yes, the guidance we receive from there can be tainted by those unresolved traumas or woundings, even from generations back. So that's another aspect that is important to connect with and look into our own early trauma and attend to it, but also of our generations back. So I'm curious about your experiences with all of that, and personally, what your experience was of connecting with that rooted guidance and addressing some of those issues for yourself.
Sure. Yeah. A couple things come to mind. So, I think as women, first and foremost, like specific to women, you know, yes, our womb, we have this innate desire that can't necessarily be turned off to create. So that can be in the form of a physical child, but it can also be like creative expression. So as women, you know, there's this phrase like wild woman, which I just think of as creative expression, like this Pele goddess who just wants to kind of unleash um, her internal fire and abundance. So I think that's really important, you know, and connecting to this womb space, you kind of identify and get clear on what that is for you. Um, and about the voices, yeah. So I think there's, you know, the mind is always so quick to kind of go out of balance and steer you in different directions, and that can absolutely happen with our womb as well, because as you mentioned, trauma triggers, who knows, we have so many different things and events that we experience as humans. So um, what I have found in steaming is that I can listen to my gut brain of sorts and my womb center, and kind of really, it takes time. Like, I remember the first time that I sat, I was like, this is kind of weird. This is weird. I'm sitting on a little hot bath, and steam is, you know, coming up into my body, and am I supposed to be feeling more than just like hot water? Like, just, you know, all these questions came up, and that was the mind. So as soon as I kind of got quiet and got into like a meditation space, then I started to really open and receive. And the more that I steamed the kind of guidance or downloads, you know, I think it does. Yes, we point to up above a lot, or, you know, out external sources, but it comes from within. And that's the overall message that I meant by your own healer and awakening to your own intuition. This is something that we all have, men and women. And for women, I think that the more that you connect to this space, you can kind of decipher and discern the voices in your head that could be leading you in different directions and kind of get to your truth. Further along with, I just lost it. What did you?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. So I also think that there can be a clearing of the lineages, and so we talk a lot about in women's health that we hold a lot of stories and emotions in our pelvic region. And I do believe that this is passed down from woman to woman. So sometimes you'll see in families that the mom has really bad cramps or a difficult period, and then the children, for girls, might follow suit. That to me is a sign that there is a lineage of some sort of trauma being passed down, and to look a little deeper. You know, on the physical sense, it can help ease all these symptoms of menstrual pain and discomfort. But I agree with you, Sama, that there is a lineage, and sometimes you hear that path that has been, and the story that's been passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah. And I mean, it can be as simple as, oh, you know, my mother had this attitude that menstruation was a painful nuisance.
Right.
And she passed that on to me, and her mother passed that on to her, and her mother passed that on to her. And generations of thinking of menstruation as a painful nuisance is going to create menstruation as a painful nuisance, right? We're going to have that experience. It doesn't have to be a big trauma like someone was raped or sexually abused, although that can often be the case. The statistics on that are appalling. But you know, that wasn't the case for me. The abuse that I felt was more on the emotional end of my mother not being supported and being, you know, overpowered and dominated by my adopted father and by the systems that didn't honor her fertility, didn't give her the information that she needed, and didn't initiate her properly into her full adult fertility. And just that is traumatic in and of itself, and produces traumatizing events like my mother being 10 years old and not knowing anything about menstruation and starting to bleed.
Yeah.
And looking and thinking she was going to die. Yeah. For a 10-year-old, that alone is extremely traumatic.
Yeah.
And wearing 3 pairs of underwear to school every day for a period of time until her mother did the laundry and noticed what was going on. Yeah. And still gave her only the minimum of information, so that she still didn't know 100% about her fertility until 7 years later, when she's fooling around with a boyfriend and maybe talking to some girlfriends, and it dawns on her what's going on. And then she asks her boyfriend, what would happen if I got pregnant? And he says, that would be your problem.
Oh my God.
So pregnancy is treated as a problem. Right. And men are taught that they don't have to take any responsibility for it. Mm-hmm. And not initiated into their own responsibility for fertility. So just these basic, systematic, cultural attitudes that are just blanketly common. Mm-hmm. Menstruation is a nuisance, shameful, and painful. It's a pretty common belief system.
Yeah.
And pregnancy is a problem, that we should have shame and not tell our children about their fertility, that we don't have any kind of initiate. And then men aren't taught, certainly, to have anything to do with fertility and babies and child rearing, because that would undermine their masculinity, right? I mean, it's seriously that strong that they don't, you know, if young boys want to play with dolls, it's like, oh my God, no, you can't do that, right? And so there's this systematic cultural trauma to our very nature and to our womb space that, you know, it's not really a trauma on the surface, but it results in traumatic experiences like that, of where suddenly the natural development of our bodies and our beings and our lives is not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone is traumatic for everyone, whether, you know, and then on top of it, we've got rape and sexual abuse and ritual abuse, and, you know, the list goes on and on. And so we don't have healthy ways to process the emotions just of everyday life, because that's suppressed as well. And by the way, if you're not aware of the chakra system, emotions are held in that same area of the body in the womb space. And so, you know, if our mothers don't have healthy emotional development and processing ways, we learn that's transmitted. We learn the same way that our mother and our father and the other adults in our lives, we absorb that. We're little sponges, right? We, as we're growing up in those early years, designed that way on purpose. So I'm going on and on because I'm so passionate about this. And I would love to hear specific stories, if you have some, about your awakening process to all of this and your healing process to all of this. When did you, I mean, you talked about sitting on the steaming pot for the first time, wondering if this is all I'm feeling, or, you know, what's really going on, and then getting to a deeper, quieter space. And I'm curious, did you have an initial experience of, oh, wow, I have access now to more insight from a new place for me, a more rooted place? Like, could you describe some of your life circumstances, choices, experimentations that started to bring that into your life?
Yeah. Well, I'll touch a little bit on my trauma too. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, with just a loving mother. She's amazing, and she raised me by herself. So a single mother adopted me from India, and what an inspiration and a role model for strong, independent, fearless mother woman power. I mean, gorgeous. But I would say that I did kind of always suffer from some sort of anxiety or nervousness, not really sure of like who I was, and but I kind of turned a lot of that off all throughout my childhood and then into early adulthood. I was in the fashion industry prior to being in Ayurveda and holistic healing. And so what was happening was actually, so I moved to LA at age 18 and was actually raped within the first 6 months of being here. I'm in Los Angeles currently. And that was just, of course, debilitating and like, what? So from that point, I then really kind of got even more paralyzed in a way. So everything kind of just began to shut down. Friends were pivoting out, and you know, everything just kind of became small and very very different and wobbly. And so I think from that place, um, and then just kind of ignoring all those signals and messages in my own being of like, you know, you need help, you need support. I kind of just trudged through. And what happened was I don't know if I gave myself this illness, but I had this chronic dis-ease, which is, it's called gastroparesis, which basically means your stomach is paralyzed. So I lived with this for about 10 years, maybe a little less. And then I decided to go to India on a pilgrimage journey. I stayed there for 2 months. and I went to my origin birthplace, saw my orphanage, and then decided to stay at an Ayurvedic ashram. At this point, I had tried so many Western doctors and approaches, and then Eastern philosophies, and everything just kind of felt like band-aids and not really getting to the root of the issue. And so I said, okay, as a last go, I might have to live with this the rest of my life, but let me try my own medicine and see what happens. So I, through a friend, found this really amazing, great doctor in India, and I stayed with him, and he, it was a really rough journey. Ayurveda is known as the wisdom of life, and it can kind of also be translated to kind of a common sense science, because it really reflects and mirrors nature. But my on ramp, especially kind of living in this very Western culture of going to a 9-to-5 job every day, and not really caring for myself in terms of cooking nightly meals and understanding what I'm putting in my system. I was always pretty healthy, but definitely not like I am today. And I was completely in awe and speechless of his wisdom, of the simplicity of the teachings that he was passing on to me while he was, of course, doing panchakarma and working to heal the physical imbalances within me. And I left, and then he said, this is a journey. You're gonna be doing this for the next 6 months to a year. I followed his story and protocol to a T, and I healed almost completely. The only thing is, I think that part of the journey is accepting what is ours and our stories and kind of what we've come into this life with. So I now understand myself to be just a sensitive person, and I kind of just always need to be healthy and eating clean and making sure that I'm taking care of myself. So coming back into that, I tried my hand at fashion again, but that didn't pan out because I needed to take care of myself, and I was kind of getting back into the old grind, and then I realized, I think I want to inspire other women to do this and live for themselves. And so, yeah, that's kind of my healing journey of how I really identified with it. And then, of course, there were teachers along the way that just led me to where I am today.
Beautiful. And so when you were at the Ayurvedic ashram, and in what you've learned about Ayurveda, I would love to hear how Ayurveda includes the womb and the feminine reproductive system and the feminine essence that resides there into the teachings and the healing process.
Yeah, well, I think Ayurveda can have a pretty traditional view on this, but when you zoom out of Ayurveda, there's Purusha and Prakriti. So it is female and male, feminine and masculine. And so that is kind of the overall, I think we live in a day where there's lots of female empowerment, girl power and just, feminine energy. But I actually think it's a balance. We have to come into right relation with masculine and feminine energy together. So I would say, from that zoomed out perspective of Ayurveda, of housing and beginning life with Purusha and Prakriti, then I think that, it's through the womb that it's kind of the woman's job to kind of own her femininity and her truth. And then the male can kind of be the pillar, and men are so good at like kind of being this force of like just solid ground, right? And then the female kind of does the dance around the male. So that's kind of my general perspective of the womb and Ayurveda. But there's lots of womb healing in Ayurveda, and it's kind of a long and daunting area of exploration that I'm still learning and stepping into. But also, you know, the teaching is that the period is kind of a sacred time. So again, bringing it back to our menstrual cycles, um, you know, this is a time, it's kind of our essence. If we identify with our true essence, then we can kind of set ourselves up for success throughout the rest of our cycle, which is monthly. So not cooking, you know, cooking ahead of time and preparing your meals so you're kind of restful and can be open to this cleansing time of purification. You know, your intuition is really high on your moon, so um, that's really good to kind of stay quiet. And the voice is, you know, it's good to not overexert the voice. Maybe cut down on your social engagements during this time. I don't know if this is Ayurveda, but somewhere in my teachings, I heard that as women, we're married to the moon first because we're so guided by the moon. And so I think, you know, connecting again to Mother Nature and the lunar cycles and phases, that's kind of the heart of how we as women can identify with a greater cycle that is outside of us.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and I know this is the case pretty much anywhere, but I also am aware that in Indian culture, there are some quite shame-laced belief systems that have been sort of layered on top of and infused into this practice, this traditional practice of women resting, not doing household chores, so much so that there's this practice of they can't even sleep inside the house. Or I've seen that, and so, and that there's this idea that women are dirty during that time, and that the menstrual blood is dirty and shameful, and anyone who encounters or touches a woman, you know, during that time is then soiled and must cleanse themselves as well, and that's been turned into the reason why women aren't supposed to prepare food at that time and like that, instead of it being this time for women to connect with their intuition and be relieved of the typical work so that she can rest and do this sacred practice, right? That's two different ways of thinking about it, and the way that you expressed it was more that second way of how can a woman care for herself. But I know that most people, even though they may be doing those practices, are actually doing it in this shameful, dirty way. And so I'm curious to hear how your teacher presented it. Did you have to translate it to not be shameful and dirty? How does I'm assuming, I don't know, how does the Ayurvedic teachings usually, do you see some of that dirtiness energy in there?
Yeah, what I see is that kind of comes from a religious perspective as well. So it's really important to understand that Ayurveda is not a religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a science, and it's a wisdom science. So kind of separating those two, and then so looking at traditional text versus text that has been also introduced with the religion of Hinduism or you know, whatever the religion is. But my teachers, you know, when I was at the ashram, for example, I was there for about a month, and I definitely had my moon cycle. And what he told me, and what I really kind of understood, that it wasn't about shame or dirty. It's really that this is a cleanse. And so as women, we're so lucky that we get a monthly uterine cleanse. And that was what was really stressed to me. And then again, following other teachers after that, it was really the same message, that to discredit the teachings that this is shameful. You know, we all bleed. What is blood? Like, what is going on during our period? You know, so it's just kind of been a re-education, I guess, of what is actually going on, and on an energetic level. I mean, if you think about it, when you see blood, 9 times out of 10, it's like, stop what you're doing. You know, and so it's kind of the same thing. We are bleeding, and during that time, it's magical. I mean, it can be very painful, and the onslaught of symptoms that we get at this time. But if you can hold yourself in gratitude and remember that this is a gift and this is your time to take a mental note of your last month and what was serving you and what wasn't serving you, then that's kind of, it's golden. And so again, all my teachers were very emphatic that the cooking and all of these rules that they kind of put in place was not because of the shame, but because it actually benefits and soothes the woman.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Right. It's not to protect other people from her dirtiness, but instead it's to give her that rest and restoration that she needs to really focus on this important internal process of release and renewal that's happening naturally for her every month, and to value that process in the cycles of creativity, and that's what really speaks to me about this shift in how we're learning to reclaim menstruation as a feminine superpower instead of a nuisance and a pain, right? And so as we start to recognize that actually that cycle, that cyclical way of the womb, of coming into that creative phase of building a home or a nest for something to potentially be nurtured, and then building it all up, and then releasing whatever got built up each month in a cyclical way, and then building something else up again and again and again, and this, that is an important part of the creative process. Something that is sinking in for me about that's very potent, is that teaches us how to invest in something even if it doesn't come to fruition, and celebrate everything that we learned how to do to build a nest for whatever inspiration we might have, even if it doesn't come into fruition. That unattached willingness to keep building, knowing that each time we build that, even if we have to release that particular egg, that particular inspiration, because it doesn't come to fruition, that we learned a whole bunch in that whole process. And anybody who's successful with creating something in the world will tell you that they failed at it more times than they succeeded, right? And that can become very discouraging in a society that does not value that exhale, that release, that letting go of things that aren't working. That phase of the menstrual cycle teaches us how to appreciate. And so if we're constantly supposed to be building in this linear way and just building and building and building and building and never having that, we get burnt out, we get exhausted. It's not good for our bodies, when we ignore that release, that exhale. Yeah. And so that wisdom of that cyclical nature, it's almost like it gives us that momentum, like a wheel. I mean, and we roll, right? Otherwise, we can't get that momentum. It falls off at a certain point. And so, yeah, that was just a recent insight, and because I can get, there's a grief when you have to let go of something that you built up to or invested in. I imagine you might have personal experience of that around your work in fashion. That, you must have had a lot of passion around that to begin with, especially as a young woman. You like beautiful things, I'm imagining, and you like to design your own things, and it's very glamorous and all of that. And then you've got this health thing, and you're burnt out and you can't digest, and you went to LA to be in fashion, and first thing that happens is,
rude awakening.
Rude awakening, I can imagine. And to let that go was probably quite a menstruation.
Oh yeah, the journey. And that's what I love about menstruation in general, is that it holds the answers. Like, you can understand so much about your womb and what's going on with you emotionally, internally, just by studying your blood every month.
Mm-hmm.
So we are cyclical beings, just to follow up with what you said. I agree. And so as women, it kind of can be daunting to think that we're just always in a cycle and we jump from one to the next. So again, coming back to your moon time, it is a respite before you go into the next cycle. And also thinking about procreation, like that is what our bodies are built for. But if you don't identify with that story, again, sticking to the principle that we are creative beings, and this is where our creativity is birthed from. So whether it be a business project, an art project, whatever creative inspiration you may have in your life, yes, this is the time to kind of rethink it through and just take into account what's working and go further.
Yeah, and that design of that heightened intuition, that heightened access to inner guidance in the premenstrual time, that heightened and during menstruation, that heightened sensitivity towards things that aren't really working in our lives, that often gets labeled as premenstrual syndrome because women are can be more irritable at that time, like the things that they're able to put up with the rest of the month because they're busy creating this or doing that, and like that. Then in that release time, it's like, okay, now I'm really seeing the dirty socks on the floor, and I'm really feeling it when somebody's words aren't as loving and soft as I would like them to be. And we have this instinct to clear that out immediately during that time. And that's how we can become quite volatile at that time, because we're preparing to create a better nest. There's the grief that one didn't, that one's being released. Something didn't work. And then we're looking at, why didn't it work? Right? This is all within our design. We're looking at, why didn't it work? And how can I make a better nest next time? And I'm going to do it. I'm going to make sure that I eliminate those things that didn't work. Right? So that's the whole reason we get PMS.
Yeah.
Is because of that design. And our menstrual cycle, the pain of our menstrual cycle, or the dis-ease or imbalance in our menstrual cycle is also trying to give us the message about what's working and what's not working. And so there's a purposefulness in all of that.
And it doesn't have to, you don't have to give into the concept that like every month you're going to have PMS. That PMS is a time of, as you said, clarifying your needs. So you're going into the cleansing state, you're moving more introspective, more inward. And so you really kind of, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, no, I got to say this because this is not okay, And so we become very fiery and volatile. But as we learn, and if you can kind of stay on schedule with your cycle and empowering your voice to speak up throughout the cycle, when the first kind of initial, discordance, whatever that may be, and if you can speak it at that time, then actually when you come back around to the premenstrual time, then you might not have those outbursts or volatility.
Exactly. And in fact, that's one way that I, and probably you and other womb-centered healing practitioners, counsel and mentor women how to deal with PMS, because they may not want to divorce their husband or kick their kids out of the house every month, really, even though they might feel like that at that time every month, right? And so learning how to maybe take some notes about the things that are really bothering you, set that conversation aside to that springtime time after menstruation. Give ourselves that deep rest and time to really allow our inner guidance to give us insights in how to address these discordances or these disharmonies in the structures of our lives, and allow ourselves to feel what those feel like fully, right? And then when it comes to the springtime, we can incorporate that into the building process, right? The springtime being that first period of time between the end of menstruation, the end of the bleeding time, and the ovulatory time is when we're building that nest again. And if we, the temptation is to say, oh God, I finally feel better, I'm just going to go on happy-go-lucky, right? And enjoy this and not think about and sweep all that other stuff under the rug. But if we can value that wisdom, right, instead of denigrating it and saying, oh, that's just the pain of my stupid menstrual cycle, right? Instead of that, we can say, wait a second, it's giving me this precious wisdom, what works and what doesn't. And then that time, that springtime, is a much easier time. We're much more eloquent. We're much more able to feel other people and what's going on for them, to problem solve, to find ways to communicate what our needs are, and create a plan or a structure around that. And I was blown away recently too, because there's so much shame in the world around asking for some, anything around our menstrual cycle, for example, because of that. Oh, PMS is such a shameful thing, and it doesn't have any wisdom or value. It's just this, horrible thing that women go through. Instead of, wait a second, there is this wisdom there, and it's calling for a level of self-care. And I recently asked my husband, or included my husband in that conversation, in that practice of caring for myself more, which was revolutionary for me. It seems like a small thing, but it's huge, because I had to realize, oh, wow, there's still this, I'd been working for years on not having shame myself, but there was this shame or worry about asking him to be involved in that, And of course he was like, oh, okay, well, and it was a little bit uncomfortable for him at first too, because he'd never been asked that by a woman in his life, right? And so, but then I just started the conversation and assert that, this is what I'm doing. I'm menstruating now. I'm not picking up the slack around the household, and us having a month where he worked an extra day on the week that I was menstruating, and I didn't pick up the slack around the household. And guess what happened? It got to be a real mess around here, and we cleaned it up later, but it was like, okay, that didn't work so well. And then he asked me again this last month. This woman wants me to sub for her. I might do an extra day. How does that look? And I said, well, look, this is when I'm going to be menstruating again. I'm not going to be available to pick up the slack.
Right.
Remember what happened last month when oh, okay, I'll tell her I'm not available that week, and she can choose a different week. What? It was such a change for me. Yes, I know. It felt so amazing, and of course, he's, a super supportive, devoted husband. It's just a matter of finding, honoring that for myself.
That's right.
And
you advocate for yourself, then who is?
Exactly.
And I agree with you. I think, if you are in partnership, yes, definitely it's wonderful to have your partner along for the ride and really bring them into this mindset, and kind of just overall conversation of what's going on with you, the woman. Mm-hmm. So with my partner, we have lots of conversations around hormones and just like the difference between men and their hormonal changes, and then women and our hormonal changes. I also I take my temperature every morning, which is a way to kind of one step to kind of identify with your rhythm and such. And he asks me every morning, "What is your temperature?" And I'm like, "Why are you asking? You don't need to know." And he's like, "Yes, I do need to know." And I'm just like, "Wow, okay, I like this."
Yes. Uh-huh.
The partner into it, or even if you're the only woman in your community that's really inspired by all of this knowledge and wisdom, then teaching the women around you, but bringing community into your period, your cycle, and owning your emotions is just all part of it, and I think will support like the greater healing that's kind of taking place on this planet, which is to soften into the feminine and to realize that we're not these like weird beings that bleed every month, but actually we have great wisdom and teaching that comes from this cycle.
Right. And that is part of nature, that we are natural beings, and we're living creatures that reproduce. And if you look at, one thing that comes up for me is to look at all living creatures. Plants are a really good example. Okay, so plants, the way plants grow, especially flowering, fruiting plants, their whole purpose in life is to create that flower and that fruit, okay, or vegetable, or whatever it is, to create those seeds. And they will channel all of their energies into that. And when under stress, they'll channel even more energy into that. And the quality of the seeds when they're under stress won't be as high, but they'll make more, or they'll, their whole structure, their whole design is around that. And that's true for all natural beings. It's like the primary motivation is to contribute to sustaining the species and to the evolution of the species by delivering the information of your experience into the DNA that's creating the next version of your species, right? So all living beings on this planet, their main focus of their design, of our design, is the womb, is that perpetuating the species. Now, we as humans try to think that we're more evolved than that, and that we have other purposes, right? But that's just part of our species, and our core primary thing is still to evolve our species through the activities of the womb. And those activities may be having babies, but they may be creating something, and that the womb is still that evolutionary instrument to create that new thing. And so, there's a lot of feminists that want to free us from this idea of the patriarchal idea that we are limited to our reproductive capacity by saying, oh, these ideas of the goddess that are around the reproductive cycle are, keeping us trapped in that, and all of that. But that's like saying the flower is trapped by its desire to create a flower. I mean, and so it's really the patriarchal idea, I agree, around our reproductive primal impulse, saying that that's only about making babies. I agree that that is a limitation, and that we can expand out of that and saying we're not just about making babies, we are about evolving. And we've evolved to a place where we can, making babies isn't the only way that we evolve by giving ourselves new experiences, by creating new things. And so, but that still arises and is nourished by these cycles, these rhythms that are part of our nature. And so, boy, I kind of went off there. It's really inspiring to talk with you. And so I want to go back to one thing you said before we wrap up, which was you were talking about the Purusha and the, was it Prakriti? And you were saying something about how there's the masculine and the feminine energy in that area. I'm familiar with Purusha, the term, and I think I'm familiar with Prakriti, but perhaps for other listeners, as well as myself, who might not be as well versed in these terms, could you define it a little bit? Which one of those is the masculine principle? Which one is the feminine principle? What do they each mean? Where do they reside? And how does Ayurveda teach us how to balance those energies? Those are a lot of questions. Whatever you can address.
Well, basically, so it's kind of a funneling system. So Purusha is the male and Prakriti is the female. And so these, I think it goes Purusha and then Prakriti. I can't remember. I might be flip-flopping them. But basically, they cannot exist without each other. And then it funnels down into what is creation, really, and ego and all of these other layers that then become, us to living form. So, and within nature. So everything has started with the energy of female and male, feminine and masculine energies. Otherwise, nothing would be existing. So, yeah. Is there more than that?
Well, my understanding of Purusha was that it was it resided inside of our bodies, or that there was a connection to Purusha through the second chakra, through a location just below the navel and back towards the spine. That was what I was taught. Now, I'm imagining if we can connect with Purusha from there, we're probably connecting with Prakriti from there as well, and that my teachings failed to mention that. And so I'm curious, so it sounds to me like that, but that teaching that I did receive, even though it was only focused on the Purusha, was hinting at this portal to spirit in the womb that I keep talking about. So I'm curious how you see and how we can connect with those essential masculine feminine energies, and if that was part of the teaching too, that there's a portal or an access point in our bodies in that area.
I do. I'm not remembering the access point and where it resides in the body right now, but yes, that rings true for me as well, your teaching. So, I really identify Prakriti with the root chakra because this is our womb space, and so it just feels very feminine and kind of Prakriti is like all about creation. So that's where I kind of hold Prakriti. I don't know if I'm correct, so we'll have to double check our Ayurvedic references. But yeah, and then I think that would make sense for Purusha to be at the second chakra. So yeah, okay. And then what was next?
And then how do you work with balancing your relationship and your access to those energies internally? How do they influence you? And
yeah, so I guess I identified with them internally by kind of not hooking into, so I take off the labels Purusha and Prakriti and then kind of put on the labels of masculine and feminine, and then so what are my hard edges, where am I not soft, and then where am I like fluid and moving with harmony of nature. And so kind of keeping these in balance through diet and self-care and meditation, yoga, all of these ways that we can nurture ourselves bringing those into right relation. So if for me, I don't feel I have a lot of like pitta energy. I have a lot of vata. And so for me, I kind of always question when I am super harsh or more direct with my tongue or whatever it may be, then that to me is more masculine, more pitta energy, and then kind of going to the Purusha. So yeah, I think there's honestly like a lot of ways to self-identify with these energies that reside in us. But the key is to really just balance out them. So.
Yeah, and from what I understand with Ayurveda as well as other, Eastern healing modalities, Chinese medicine and like that you have a whole system of foods that you identify. Foods might be, some foods are more feminine, prakriti type foods, some foods are more masculine, and there's a whole other system of, you're talking about the vata, pitta, kapha. That's it. There's just three. And that balancing between those, and if I remember correctly, the vata is more associated with wind and can be, if unbalanced, can be somewhat cold, aloof, detached, out there in the ethers, not very rooted, and
up in space.
Right, and then the pitta is associated more with fire, can be reactive, inflamed, and like that. And then the
go-getters in life, they're just
right,
on that chain.
Right, and then the kapha is more watery, earthy energy, which can actually end up being, if unbalanced, can, without also bringing in the fire and the air, can end up being like this muddy, heavy, difficult to move kind of an energy. And so we all are born with a certain constellation of these energies. And what's that called, your initial constitution?
That's called prakriti.
Prakriti.
Constitution.
Interesting. I knew I had heard that term, and I wondered if that was the same term. So your prakriti, your feminine principle, is also that constellation of those energies.
Yeah, and that's why I think I was kind of doing the zoom out perspective, that the prakriti are outside of us, and then in the funnel we get into our doshas, which is vata, pitta, kapha. And then knowing these energies, because just like Purusha and Prakriti, feminine and masculine, we have all of the elements and all of the doshas within us. We just have either a predominance of two or one. It's really rare to find someone who's tridoshic, meaning they have an equal balance of all three energies in their body. But yeah, just to know that we have all energies in our body, and then to understand what is most dominant for us. And then also, as of right now, I think Ayurveda is becoming really trendy and popular, and knowing your prakriti is kind of cool, and but actually it can get, for practitioners, I think you get to a point where you can just know with people, but for the day-to-day and understanding your own energy, if you're interested in learning and just living an Ayurvedic lifestyle, I think actually to identify and understand your vikriti, which is your current imbalance, because the important thing to note here is that your prakriti, so your original body constitution of your mind body makeup, stays kind of the same, and it doesn't stay the same. You can have an imbalance of your prakriti, but your prakriti is not going to cause you disease. So it's in harmony, just because that's what you were with at the time of conception. The vikriti is what you want to focus on, because that's the imbalance, and by focusing on that, you can bring yourself back to your center,
to your original harmony. Fascinating. Thank you so much for for explaining all of that. I've studied a little bit of Ayurveda. But so all the foods, the way we take care of ourselves, our daily activities, even self-care, meditation practices, movement practices, thought patterns, belief systems, emotions, all have one or another of these qualities, either the windy vata energy, our lifestyle habits, if we're running around all the time, commuting long distances, jumping from situation to situation, a billion different meetings, lots of talking. That's a very vata lifestyle, right? Lots of coffee, right? And then, and that can become very easily imbalanced, unrooted, scattered, unable to really create something to completion, right? I imagine you're familiar with that. You said you had some vata energy. I am too, funny enough, even though I'm very kapha to begin with, but then the fire, it can be inflammatory and like making things happen despite disturbing other people, all that kind of stuff, domination oriented kind of thing, if you take it to the full extreme, right? And then the water, earth, the kapha, can be more sort of sedentary, hard to make directional changes, not liking unfamiliar circumstances.
Yeah, the balanced kapha is really just solid and stable and nurturing and, wants to inspire others, but very soft and loving. I don't know, you could think if you have a doting grandmother who's just like,
right.
That's the kapha energy.
Right. I was focusing in on how they can get into an imbalance, okay? And then we can rebalance those to their most beautiful expressions by bringing different things in. So like if my kapha energy gets too sedentary, difficult to move, if I bring in some windy practices, some vata practices of feeling the inspiration of all these different people that I interview on my summits, for example, that gets things moving. And if I bring in the fieriness of the passion for what I'm doing, then that gets me moving, right? And nourishes and brings to the surface that motherly, doting grandmother energy that you're talking about, as opposed to the one who's catatonic in the wheelchair, right? So all of our behaviors, we can look at them through the lens of these elemental essences, and make choices on how to be in harmony by returning to our feminine essence, the Prakriti.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that brings us to the prayer that we all find the support and insight and inner wisdom and guidance to bring us to that harmony, and that we come in together in that harmony in all of our endeavors.
I love it.
Our prayer for today. That's beautiful. And so, I just want to say one more thing to bring in the steaming that you talked about, because the steaming, I was noticing in another call, I've been talking with other vaginal steaming practitioners, hydrotherapy, peri-steam hydrotherapy practitioners. I think that's where I found you, as I was looking through Kelly Garza's listing of her students, and certified practitioners all over the world. And the steaming has all of those elemental essences to it, right? It has the fire that heats up the water, right? The steam is a very fiery, hot thing, right? But it's balanced with the water. You're not just sitting over a flame. You've got,
I just love steaming.
Right? And then the herbs have that earthy rootedness, and you're bringing that through the steam, through the fire, the water. And the steam is a very vata thing too, right? All of those molecules from the herbs and from the water are being carried up by the air and the interaction between the heat and the air and the currents. So it's this very harmonious treatment that brings all the qualities of all of the doshas.
You got it. You put together, that was beautiful.
I feel so blessed to be receiving this wisdom and being able to transmit it with you to our listeners. So thank you so much for that. And so if people wanted to, do you have any, for example, online resources or a way that people can get in touch with you, like a website, or something like that?
Yes. So, well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. This is such a joy to converse and talk about healing, more of that. And you can connect with me on my website at anandadmartini.com. It is going through some changes, so it's beautiful now, but it'll be better soon. But you can sign up for my newsletter there, or just get my email and shoot me an email. You can also find me on Instagram, Ananda DiMartini. Those are the two ways of really kind of initiating your connection to me.
Beautiful. And if you want to learn more about the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, which is the organization, the overarching organization that this podcast is a part of, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com and learn about the Womb-Centered Healing Temple. And I'm particularly excited to announce our upcoming Embodied Shakti Summit, where I interview speakers with around similar topics that we talked about today, and have a whole long list of other speakers where we're talking about this embodiment of our Shakti, our feminine principle. We're going to start talking about Prakriti as well in some of these interviews. So you can sign up for that as well now. That sign up link will be there when you go to wombcenteredhealing.com. So thank you all so very much for joining us. And again, holding this vision of harmonious reconnection and reestablishment of our feminine essence for all beings.
That's onward and upward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's all for now. Until next time.